I am Zoe King, 29 years old, and I spend my days breathing life back into dead clocks. As an antique horologist, I understand that the smallest gear often turns the biggest hands, and that patience is a weapon that looks a lot like silence. My family, however, only sees the gold plating on the outside. They never understood why I chose a dusty workshop over the family limelight. Standing in the suffocatingly perfumed living room of our Hamptons estate, watching them celebrate my grandfather's death, I felt less like a daughter and more like a smudge on their polished existence. At my grandfather's funeral, my family inherited his yacht penthouse luxury cars and company. For me, the lawyer handed over just a small envelope with a plane ticket to Monaco. Guess your grandfather didn't love you that much. My mother laughed, hurt but curious. I decided to go. When I arrived, a driver held up a sign with my name saying, "Ma'am, the prince wants to see you." Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family who underestimated your worth. Now let us step back into that room to see exactly how they dug their own graves. The scent of lilies was overpowering, but it was the stench of greed that made me nauseous. Sterling, my brother-in-law, had his crocodile skin loafers propped up on Grandfather Silas's antique mahogany coffee table. He was swirling a glass of 30-year-old whiskey, the very bottle Grandfather had saved for a special occasion, treating it like common tap water. "Hey, Zoe!" Sterling called out, his voice thick with unearned confidence and the arrogance of a man who has never worked a day for his money. "Are you sure you do not want to beg me for a job? I heard those old clocks you fix barely bring in 40 grand a year. Chloe needs someone to walk her poodles and pick up their mess." Chloe, my younger sister, was too busy adjusting the filter on her funeral selfie to look up. She giggled and said, "Come on, babe, Zoe has too much pride. She would rather starve than work for us." My mother, Loretta, stormed in her heels, clicking aggressively against the hardwood. She checked her diamond watch, ignoring me completely to glare at Mr. Pendergast, the family lawyer. "Get on with it, Pendergast. I have a chemical peel scheduled for 4 o'clock. Do not waste my time with formalities." I sat in the corner clutching Grandfather's old handkerchief, the only person in the room who had actually visited him in the hospice while they were skiing in Aspen. Pendergast cleared his throat, offering me a fleeting look of pity before reading from the heavy document. According to the last will and testament of Silas King, the entire real estate portfolio in New York, including the triplex penthouse in Tribeca, and this Hamptons estate goes to his only daughter, Loretta King. My mother slammed her hand on the table, screaming, "Yes!" She immediately started calculating the millions, her eyes wide with the manic joy of a woman who just hit the jackpot. Pendergast continued. "The super yacht known as the Black Pearl, the collection of 12 vintage automobiles, and the controlling 51% stake in King Global Logistics go to his granddaughter Chloe King and her husband Sterling to act as CEO." The room erupted. Sterling jumped up, hugging Chloe. They were screaming about being rich, about Sterling finally being a CEO of a billion-dollar empire. They popped a bottle of champagne, the cork flying across the room and hitting the family portrait. Liquid gold spilled onto the Persian rug, but they did not care. They were celebrating their windfall without a single thought for the man who had died to give it to them. Pendergast raised his voice to cut through their celebration. "There is one more beneficiary." Silence fell. Sterling sneered at me, saying, "Oh, right, Zoe. Did he leave you his old toolkit? Maybe a box of rusty screws." Pendergast walked over to me. He did not read from the paper. He just handed me a thin white envelope. Inside there was no check, no deed, just a single plane ticket. Economy class. One way, to Nice, France. Attached were 3 $100 bills. Sterling snatched the ticket from my trembling hands. Monaco. Economy. He laughed until he choked, waving the ticket like it was a piece of trash. The old man really did lose his mind. "He wants you to go backpacking. Maybe you can find a job scrubbing toilets on our yacht when it docks there. Or perhaps you can beg the tourists for change." My mother plucked the $300 from the envelope and tossed them at me. "That is enough for a taxi to a cheap hostel." "Zoe, I told you Grandfather never respected you. You are too boring. You wasted your youth in that dusty workshop while Chloe learned how to shine." "But Mom, I whispered, my voice shaking. I was the only one there when he took his last breath. That was your duty. She snapped, her face twisted with cruelty. Because you are useless. You do not bring in money or status. Now get out. This house belongs to me, and the company belongs to Sterling. You have no place here. Sterling threw the ticket back at me like he was feeding a pigeon. Be careful not to get arrested for begging in Monte Carlo, Zoe. We would hate to have to bail you out. Actually, we wouldn't bail you out at all. I looked at the ticket in my hand. The black ink blurred as I tried to focus. Why would grandfather do this? He taught me that precision matters, that every piece has a purpose. This felt like a cruel joke. But I stood up. I did not cry. Tears are a luxury for those who are loved, and I realized in that moment I was entirely alone. I looked at them, engraving their triumphant smiles into my memory. I took the ticket and walked out, leaving behind the only home I had ever known. I carried nothing but my purse, the $300, and a small, strange wooden box grandfather had given me weeks ago, warning me never to open it until I reached my destination. 24 hours later, I stood in the chaotic line at JFK Airport. The air was thick with the smell of stale coffee and anxiety. I felt ridiculous. A broke watchmaker heading to the playground of billionaires with a crumpled ticket in her pocket. People pushed past me, luggage wheels ran over my feet, and the noise was deafening. When I finally reached the counter, the exhausted agent took the ticket without making eye contact. She scanned the barcode. A loud beep echoed, then another. Her screen flashed a violent red. She typed frantically, her brow furrowing. She scanned it again. The red light pulsed faster. She looked up at me, her eyes wide with terror and sudden respect. Her entire demeanor shifted from boredom to panic. "Ms. King, there is a mistake," she stammered. My heart sank. I knew it. The ticket was fake. "Is it invalid?" I asked, bracing for the final humiliation. "No, ma'am," she whispered, leaning over the counter so the people behind me could not hear. "This code is not economy. It is a Royal Black Priority clearance. You are not flying commercial. Please follow me immediately." Before I could process her words, two massive security guards in black suits appeared, parting the crowd like the Red Sea. They escorted me away from the masses through a private corridor that bypassed the long security lines. We walked out onto the tarmac where the wind whipped my hair around my face. There, gleaming under the airport lights, sat a Gulfstream G650, a private jet. The flight attendant stood at the stairs, greeting me by name and handing me a glass of chilled Dom Perignon. As the jet engines roared to life and I sank into the cream leather seat, I looked out the window. My grandfather had not left me a scrap. He had left me the first move in a game my family did not even know they were playing. And as the plane climbed into the sky, leaving the city and my family behind, I took a sip of champagne and smiled. The game had officially begun. The air in Monaco smelled different than New York. It smelled of old money, sea salt, and the kind of silence that costs millions to maintain. A fleet of black Rolls-Royces waited on the tarmac, and for the first time in my life, I was not the one holding the door for someone else. I was the one sliding into the back seat. As we wound our way toward Monte Carlo, the city rose from the sea like a glittering fortress of wealth. I gripped the armrest, half expecting Sterling to jump out from behind a palm tree and laugh at me, telling me this was all a prank. But when we pulled up to the Hotel de Paris, the reality hit me harder than the Mediterranean sun. The doormen did not look at my simple department store dress or my worn shoes. They looked at the crest on the car door, and they bowed. They bowed low. A man was waiting for me in the lobby. He did not look like hotel staff. He looked like he owned the hotel, perhaps even the block. He wore a suit that cost more than my entire education, and his silver hair was swept back with severe precision. This was Lucien. He was not a prince, but in the financial underworld of Monaco, he held more power than most kings. He stepped forward, ignoring the tourists gawking at the scene, and took my hand with a reverence that made my skin prickle. "Welcome home, Mademoiselle King," he said, his voice smooth and cold like polished marble. "We have been waiting for the true heir." He led me not to a room, but to a private elevator that required a retinal scan to open. We ascended to the penthouse suite, a space larger than my mother's entire Hamptons estate, but Lucian did not let me admire the view. He walked to a small table and placed a heavy velvet box in front of me. "Open it," he commanded gently. Inside lay a key. But it was not a normal key. It was a masterpiece of engineering, intricate and geared-looking, more like the internal mechanism of a rare antique watch than a tool to open a door. My watchmaker's eyes recognized the craftsmanship immediately. This was a Breguet-style skeleton key impossible to duplicate. "This opens a private vault at the Casino de Monte Carlo," Lucien explained, his eyes locking onto mine. "Your family in America is currently celebrating their victory. They are drinking the wine and counting the cars. But your grandfather knew them well. He knew they only understood what they could see and touch." Lucien leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a whisper that sent shivers down my spine. "They inherited the body of the Empire, Zoe, the physical assets, the shiny toys. But a body without a soul is just a corpse. Silas left them the carcass to feed on. To you, he left the soul. He left you the mechanism that controls it all. And trust me, without this key, their new toys are about to become very dangerous traps." I was still holding the intricate skeleton key, feeling its cold weight against my palm, when the silence of the penthouse was shattered. My phone vibrated against the marble table. The screen lit up with a photo of my mother, Loretta. She was smiling in the picture, wearing a hat that cost more than my car. But when I answered, the voice on the other end was unrecognizable. It was a guttural scream that sounded like an animal caught in a trap. "Zoe, you little witch, what did you do?" The background noise was chaotic. I could hear sirens wailing and my sister Chloe sobbing hysterically. I put the phone on speaker so Lucien could hear. "I am in Monaco, Mother," I said calmly. "I haven't done anything. You are the one with the multi-million-dollar inheritance. Tell me, how is the view from the Tribeca penthouse?" "There is no view," she shrieked. "We are on the sidewalk. The doorman called the police. He says there are liens on the property. 5 years of unpaid property taxes, Zoe. 5 years. They put a seal on the door. They say we owe the city $4 million before we can even step inside. Where is the money to pay it? Grandfather must have left cash." Before I could answer, the phone was ripped away. Heavy breathing filled the line. It was Sterling. "Listen to me, you useless mechanic." He spat, his voice trembling with a mix of rage and terror. "It is not just the apartment. I went to the marina to take command of the Black Pearl. They laughed at me. The harbor master has impounded the yacht. He says there are outstanding maintenance fees and docking charges totaling $5 million. He said the previous owner stopped paying the bills 6 months ago." I looked at Lucien. He merely raised an eyebrow and took a sip of his tea, completely unsurprised. Sterling was not finished. And the company, Zoe. I walked into the headquarters of King Global Logistics an hour ago, ready to fire the board. But the bank was there. They froze everything. Every single account is locked because the commercial loans have matured. We have the assets, but we cannot touch them. We are sitting on a pile of gold that is actually a mountain of debt. You are the only one he trusted. Sterling yelled, the panic rising in his throat. You spent every day with him. He must have given you the codes to the offshore accounts. He must have told you where the liquid cash is. You are in Monaco right now, aren't you? I tracked your phone. You are living it up in the Hotel de Paris while we are standing here on the street being humiliated. You are spending our money. I did not deny it. I did not confirm it. I simply let the silence stretch, letting his own paranoia eat him alive. We are coming there, Sterling hissed. I used the last limit on the emergency credit card. We are boarding the next flight to Nice. Do not think you can hide. I am going to find you, and I am going to shake every cent out of you until you pay for this mess. You think you won, but you are just holding the wallet for the real owners. Stay right where you are. The line went dead. I looked at the phone, then at the key in my hand. They were coming. They were bringing their greed and their desperation to my doorstep. Lucien stood up and walked to the window, looking down at the pristine streets of Monte Carlo. Let them come, he said softly. They are flying across the ocean to a gunfight, and they forgot to bring any bullets. The Casino de Monte Carlo is not merely a gambling hall. It is a cathedral of wealth, a place where the air itself feels heavy with gold dust and silent desperation. I stood in the center of the atrium under the golden glow of the chandeliers, wearing a midnight blue velvet gown that cost $20,000. Around my neck draped the Star of the South, a diamond necklace my grandfather had kept hidden in the vault for 40 years. It felt cool and heavy against my skin, a physical reminder of the power I now held. I fit into this world perfectly now, while my family was about to crash into it like a natural disaster. I saw them before they saw me. They did not make a grand entrance. They burst through the heavy glass doors, looking like refugees from a failed life. The flight from New York had clearly been brutal. Loretta, usually so polished that she looked varnished, was wearing a wrinkled travel suit with a coffee stain on the lapel. Chloe was dragging a carry-on bag with a broken wheel, her makeup smeared from crying. And Sterling looked like a madman. His eyes were bloodshot, his expensive shirt was untucked, and he was sweating profusely. They had maxed out the last limit on the family's emergency black card just to get here, burning the final bridge of their credit to chase me across the ocean. When Sterling scanned the room and locked eyes with me, he stopped dead. He stared at the gown. He stared at the diamonds glittering around my neck. For a second, I saw pure confusion. He could not reconcile the Zoe he knew, the dusty watchmaker in overalls, with the woman standing under the crystal chandelier. But then the confusion turned to a red-hot rage. He did not see his sister-in-law. He saw a thief wearing his money. "You!" he screamed, his voice cracking and echoing off the marble walls. The elegant hush of the casino shattered. Heads turned, security guards stiffened. But Sterling was too blinded by greed to care about decorum. He dropped his bag and charged at me, pushing past a waiter carrying a tray of martinis. "You thief! You dirty little thief!" He reached me in seconds, his hand raised high, ready to slap the defiance out of my face, just like he used to verbally slap me down at family dinners. I did not flinch. I did not step back. I simply watched him come, knowing he would never reach me. Just as his hand began its downward arc toward my cheek, a shadow moved from my left. It was one of Lucien's personal bodyguards, a man built like a mountain. He caught Sterling's wrist in midair. There was a sickening crunch as the guard twisted Sterling's arm behind his back, forcing him to his knees on the polished floor. Sterling howled in pain, his face pressed against the cold marble right at the hem of my dress. "Let me go!" Sterling shrieked, struggling uselessly against the guard's iron grip. "That necklace is mine. The dress is mine. She stole my inheritance. That is my money she is wearing. Look at her. She is a fraud." Loretta and Chloe finally caught up, gasping for breath. My mother looked at me, then at the diamonds, and her hands flew to her mouth, not in concern for Sterling, who was groaning on the floor, but in sheer envy of the jewelry she believed should have been hers. "Hello, Mother," I said, my voice calm and carrying over the murmurs of the crowd. "You look tired. I suppose economy class does not agree with your complexion. You little witch." Sterling spat from the floor, drool mixing with the sweat on his chin. "I am the CEO of King Global Logistics. I command you to take that off. This is all mine." I looked down at him, pitying him the way one pities a rabid dog that needs to be put down. "You really do not understand, do you, Sterling? You flew 4,000 miles to claim a kingdom that never existed. And now you are kneeling in the one place where your arrogance is not a currency. Welcome to the real world. Bring them inside," I said to the guards, turning my back on the spectacle. The security team hauled Sterling up by his armpits and guided my trembling mother and sister into the private VIP salon adjacent to the main floor. The heavy velvet curtains were drawn shut, cutting off the noise of the casino. In the center of the room, a massive digital display hummed to life. Lucien stood beside it, holding a laser pointer, like a professor about to deliver a failing grade. Sterling rubbed his bruised wrist, his eyes darting around the room. "What is this?" he demanded, trying to regain a shred of his lost authority. "Is this where you show off more of the jewelry you stole from us?" I sat down on a leather Chesterfield sofa and crossed my legs. "No, Sterling. This is where I teach you how to read a balance sheet. Lucien, please show them the inheritance." Lucien pressed a button on a console. The screen flared to life, displaying high-resolution images of the Tribeca penthouse, the fleet of vintage cars, and the majestic Black Pearl yacht. Underneath each image was a legal document. "That is right," Loretta cried out, pointing a manicured finger at the screen. "That is the deed to my apartment. It has my name on it." "Look closer, Mother," I said softly. Lucien zoomed in on the document. In bright red letters stamped across the top of every single asset deed was the word collateral. Sterling squinted, his face paling. "Collateral. That is impossible. The old man owned everything outright. He was a billionaire. He was a billionaire because he understood leverage." Lucien explained, his voice devoid of emotion. "Every single asset in the United States, the house you sleep in, the yacht you party on, and the company you think you run, was leveraged to the hilt. Silas took out massive loans against them 10 years ago. Loans from who, Sterling asked, sweat beading on his forehead again. Which bank do we owe? We can negotiate. I can talk to the board." "You cannot negotiate with the bank, Sterling, because the bank is not Wall Street," Lucien said. He clicked the remote again. The screen changed to show a complex corporate structure. At the very top, sitting above the U.S. assets like a predator circling its prey, was a single entity named Silas Monaco Holdings. "Your grandfather borrowed the money from himself," I explained, standing up to walk toward the screen. "He created a shell company here in Monaco to hold the debt. The U.S. assets are fully mortgaged to the Monaco Holding Company." "So what?" Sterling stammered, his mind racing to find a loophole. "So we owe money to a Monaco company." "Who cares? We still control the operations. We can just stop paying." "If you stop paying, the creditor has the right to foreclose immediately," Lucien said darkly. "And here is the final piece of the puzzle." The screen changed one last time. It showed the incorporation papers of Silas Monaco Holdings. Under the line for sole proprietor and chairman, the name Silas King had been struck through. Replaced next to it was a new name activated 48 hours ago by a biometric scan and a unique code found on a plane ticket. The name on the screen was Zoe King. The silence in the room was absolute. My mother gasped for air like she was drowning. Chloe looked from the screen to me, her eyes wide with horror. Sterling dropped to his knees, not because of a guard this time, but because his legs simply gave out. "You," Sterling whispered, his voice trembling. "You are the bank. I am not the disinherited granddaughter Sterling. I am the creditor. I own the mortgage on your house. I own the lien on your yacht. And I hold the debt that keeps your company breathing. You did not inherit an empire. You inherited a loan. And I am the one who decides if you get an extension or if I take it all back." The transformation in the room was instant and pathetic. The moment the reality of the organizational chart sank in, the rage drained out of Sterling's face, replaced by a desperate, oily calculation. He did not stand up to challenge me. Instead, he shuffled forward on his knees, moving across the plush carpet like a penitent sinner approaching an altar. The man who had thrown a plane ticket at me just 24 hours ago was now looking up at me with wide, pleading eyes. "Zoe." "Wait," he stammered, his hands reaching out as if to touch the hem of my gown before pulling back. "We can fix this. You are a watchmaker, Zoe. You are brilliant with gears, sure, but you do not know how to run a multinational conglomerate. This is finance. This is corporate strategy. I have an MBA from Wharton. I know the board members. I know the shipping routes." He licked his lips, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, trying to create an alliance where none existed. "You need me, Zoe. Let's be partners. I can be your CEO. I will handle the boring business side, the firing, the restructuring, and you can just sit back in Monaco and collect the checks. We can rule this thing together. We are family, right?" I looked down at him, feeling nothing but a cold detachment. It was like looking at a broken mechanism that was too rusted to be salvaged. I turned to Lucien and held out my hand. He placed a leather-bound file into my palm. I opened the file and pulled out a single sheet of paper yellowed with age. "Sterling," I said, my voice cutting through his frantic rambling, "you claim you are a business genius, but grandfather left a specific performance review in his personal archives. Do you want to hear it?" Sterling froze, his mouth hanging open. I read aloud. Sterling is a master of spending money, but he has the financial literacy of a toddler. He could not spot a profit margin if it hit him in the face. He is not a CEO. He is a parasite looking for a host. I dropped the paper. It fluttered down and landed on Sterling's knee. His face turned a shade of gray, usually reserved for corpses. You do not need to help me run anything, Sterling, because there is nothing left to run. Lucien, bring me the tablet. Lucien handed me the digital pad, the screen glowing with the control panel for Silas Monaco Holdings. I held it so they could all see. First the real estate, I said. My finger hovered over the image of the Tribeca penthouse. My mother let out a strangled sob. No, Zoe. Please, that is my home. It is a liability, Mother. I tapped the screen. Authorized. The command sent an immediate order to the New York legal team. The foreclosure process is instantaneous. The penthouse is being seized as we speak. It will be listed for auction by tomorrow morning to cover a fraction of the tax debt you ignored. I swiped to the next tab. The yacht. Chloe screamed. Not the boat. Zoe, you cannot sell the boat. I have a photo shoot scheduled on the deck next week. I tapped the screen again. Sold. The Black Pearl is currently being liquidated to a private buyer in Dubai. The proceeds will go toward paying off the maintenance staff you fired without severance last month. And finally, I looked at Sterling, who was still kneeling, trembling violently. The crown jewel. King Global Logistics. You cannot sell the company, Sterling whispered. It has been in the family for 50 years. I am not selling it to just anyone, Sterling. I am selling it to Blue Ocean Transport. Sterling gasped. They are our biggest rival. They will dismantle the brand. They will fire me immediately. Exactly. I pressed the final button. The transaction was approved. The notification flashed green. King Global Logistics was gone, swallowed whole by the competition for a fire sale price just enough to clear the debts grandfather had leveraged against it. And just to make sure the message is clear, I added, turning to my mother and sister, I am executing one last command. I tapped a button labeled Freeze All Sub-Accounts. Simultaneously, the phones in Loretta's and Chloe's purses began to buzz. They scrambled to check them. Notifications flooded their screens. Credit card declined. Account frozen. Overdraft alert. Access denied. The music has stopped, I said, handing the tablet back to Lucien. The auction is over, and it looks like you all have been sold for parts. The silence that followed my declaration was heavy, broken only by the sound of my mother weeping. It was not a dignified cry. It was the messy, desperate sobbing of a woman watching her entire identity evaporate. Loretta King, the queen of Hampton society, the woman who would not be caught dead without her pearls, scrambled off the sofa and lunged toward me. She grabbed my hand with a grip that was shockingly strong, her perfectly manicured nails digging into my skin. Zoe, please, she wailed, her mascara running in dark streaks down her cheeks. Look at me. I am your mother. I carried you for 9 months. I went through labor for you. I gave you life. How can you do this to your own flesh and blood? We are family. You cannot just leave us destitute. I am the one who brought you into this world. I looked down at her, feeling a strange sense of detachment. For years, this woman's approval was the only thing I craved. I had fixed broken clocks, hoping she would notice my skill. I had stayed silent during family dinners, hoping she would appreciate my obedience. But looking at her now, begging for salvation, not because she loved me, but because she loved the lifestyle I now controlled, the last thread of attachment snapped. I pulled my hand away from her grip, smoothing the fabric of my gown where she had touched it. You gave birth to me, Loretta, I said, my voice cold and steady. But you did not raise me. You raised Chloe. You groomed her for success and paraded her around like a show pony. Me. You treated me like the help. For 29 years, I was not your daughter. I was your maid. I was the one who cleaned up the messes, who sat by the hospital beds, who took the insults so you could feel superior. I took a step back, putting distance between us. You always said I was a burden, Mother. You said my lack of ambition was embarrassing. You said you wished I would just disappear and stop dragging down the family name. Well, today is your lucky day. I am granting your wish. I am paying you back for everything. I am setting you free. Free, she whispered, confusion clouding her tear-filled eyes. Yes, free, I continued. You no longer have to worry about my money or my career or my embarrassing existence. You are free from the burden of being my mother. Because from this moment on, you will never see a single cent of what I own. I am cutting the cord, Loretta. You are on your own. Sterling, who had been staring at the floor in shock, looked up. His eyes locked onto the clutch purse in my hand. It was the only thing in the room that looked like immediate salvation. Zoe, he rasped, we have nothing. We literally have $0. How are we supposed to get home? We cannot stay here. A smile touched my lips. I reached into my clutch and pulled out 3 crisp $100 bills. They were the exact same bills my mother had thrown at me at the funeral. The severance pay for a lifetime of being ignored, the price they had put on my dignity. I walked over to Sterling. He flinched, expecting a blow. Instead, I tossed the bills into the air. They fluttered down like dead leaves, landing on his expensive, custom-tailored Italian suit. There is your taxi fare to the airport, Sterling, I said. Consider it a charitable donation from the Silas Monaco Holdings Foundation. It should be just enough to get you to the terminal. He stared at the money on his lap, his face burning with humiliation. Good luck getting a seat in economy class, I added, turning toward the door. Although now that I think about it, I just froze all your corporate cards and drained your personal accounts to cover the interest payments on the debt you owe me. So you probably cannot afford a ticket at all. I paused at the heavy velvet curtains, looking back at the 3 people who had defined my life for so long. They looked small. They looked broken. I hear the benches at the Nice airport are quite uncomfortable, I said. But look on the bright side. At least you have each other. And that is what family is all about, isn't it? I signaled to the guards to escort them out and walked into the bright lights of the casino, leaving the darkness behind me for good. The security guards at the Casino de Monte Carlo are trained to be discreet, but they are also trained to be effective. There was no ceremony as they marched my mother's sister and Sterling through the gilded lobby. They were not treated like VIPs anymore. They were treated like exactly what they were, trespassers with no credit and no class. The heavy glass doors swung open and my family was deposited onto the pavement outside, right next to a line of tourists waiting for taxis they could not afford. From the balcony of the Hôtel de Paris, I watched the final act of their tragedy unfold. Sterling, frantic and sweating, pulled his phone from his pocket. I could see him dialing, his hands shaking so hard he nearly dropped the device. He was calling his parents, the wealthy white glove dynasty from Connecticut, who had always looked down on my family, but tolerated Sterling's marriage because of the potential inheritance. I could not hear the conversation from up here, but I did not need to. I saw Sterling's face crumble. I saw him shouting into the receiver, pleading, begging for a wire transfer, for a jet, for anything. And then I saw him pull the phone away from his ear and stare at it in disbelief. His father had hung up. The news of the bankruptcy and the loss of King Global Logistics had likely already hit the business wires. Sterling was no longer the golden boy CEO. He was a liability, a failure, who had lost a billion-dollar company in less than 48 hours. His own family had cut him loose to protect their reputation. The collapse was immediate. On the street corners, surrounded by supercars and billionaires, my family turned on each other. Loretta screamed at Sterling, shoving his chest, blaming him for not checking the accounts. Sterling shoved her back, screaming that her spending habits had drained the liquidity. Chloe sat on her broken suitcase and wailed, realizing that her influencer lifestyle had just been foreclosed upon. They were stranded in one of the most expensive cities on earth with nothing but the clothes on their backs and $300 to share between them. I turned away from the railing. The view was getting pathetic. Inside the suite, Lucien was waiting with 2 glasses of vintage cognac. The room was quiet, peaceful, and filled with the scent of sea air. He handed me a glass, his eyes twinkling with a rare warmth. "To the new chairman of Silas Monaco Holdings," he said, raising his glass. I clinked my glass against his. "To grandfather," I replied. I walked back to the window, looking past the street drama to the harbor where the yacht formerly known as the Black Pearl bobbed in the water. I decided I would not sell it after all. I would rename it the Silas. It would be a floating office, a reminder that the biggest ships need the steadiest hands. Grandfather did not leave me a fish to eat, nor did he leave me a net. He left me the entire ocean, and he taught me how to master the waves. He knew that if he simply gave me money, they would have found a way to take it. Instead, he gave me the mechanism to control it. The King Empire bears my name now, and this time it will be built on a foundation of respect, competence, and integrity, not on the shifting sands of arrogance and greed. You see, sometimes being underestimated is the greatest strategic advantage you can have. They never saw me coming because they never bothered to look at me at all. If you enjoyed watching how I handled my arrogant brother-in-law and reclaimed my destiny, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel right now. There are plenty more stories where this came from, and trust me, the payback only gets sweeter. The most powerful lesson from Zoe's journey is that true value is rarely found on the surface. Her family chased the shiny exterior of wealth, the yachts and penthouses, but ignored the mechanism that made it work. Like a watchmaker, Zoe understood that patience and precision ultimately outlast arrogance and greed. Being underestimated wasn't her weakness, it was her camouflage. When you stay silent and hold the keys to the truth, you do not need to shout to win. You just need to wait for the right moment to turn the lock. If you believe that character always conquers greed, hit that like button and subscribe for more satisfying stories of justice.